The moment my access badge went dead, the room decided I no longer existed. The glass atrium of the Whitmore Tower was a cathedral of manufactured success, packed with cameras and executives who had practiced their applause in front of mirrors. Julian Whitmore stood at the mahogany signing table, smiling like the future had already apologized to him for the wait. He didn't look at me when he reached for my quarterly report, the one that had taken me 6 months and 3 sleepless weeks to perfect. He tore it in half. Then again, letting the white scraps flutter to the floor like confetti no one had invited. "High-end help," Julian said, projecting his voice to the gallery. He didn't look at me. He looked at the cameras. Sometimes you have to clear the clutter to see the view. The word help landed like a slap. Behind him, a hand signaled. The security team moved with practiced efficiency. Above us, the massive digital screens flickered, the corporate blue bleeding into a harsh, pulsing crimson. "Access denied." The words echoed against the glass. "A digital execution." I didn't flinch. I am Calla Whitmore. I am 42 years old. I repeated these facts as an anchor while the lead guard's fingers clamped around my bicep. Julian glanced at his Patek Philippe, impatient for the room to be cleansed of my presence. He wanted me gone before the press noticed the foundation was leaving the building. I checked my own watch. 9 a.m., exactly on schedule. The guard tugged, but I didn't stumble. I leaned toward Julian, close enough to smell his expensive cologne and the faint scent of desperation he hadn't realized he was wearing yet. "You just locked the only door that could have saved you." "Julian," I whispered. His smile didn't fail, but his eyes did. A flicker of uncertainty gone in a second. They marched me toward the exit. The badge reader chirped a sharp, electronic rejection as we passed. I had built the systems they were celebrating. I had authored the safeguards they ignored. As the cold Pittsburgh air hit my face, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a fuse that had just been lit. They handed me a cardboard box that was already creased, as if it had been waiting in a dark corner for my specific failure. I packed with surgical precision. When you've spent 20 years building an empire, you don't give the onlookers the satisfaction of a frantic exit. I took the chipped mug, the dead succulent, and the notebooks filled with code they'd never decipher. A shadow fell across my desk. It was Marcus, Julian's newest lapdog. He didn't look at me. He looked at my monitor, where my name had already been scrubbed. In its place, in a sterile, bold font, was Julian Whitmore, Chief Strategist? "The drive is missing," Marcus muttered, his eyes darting to my drawer. "He already stole it," I replied, my voice as level as a horizon. "Tell him I hope he enjoys the contents." Across the floor, Julian's laugh cut through the office, a sharp, jagged sound. He was surrounded by directors. Grandstanding in front of the master dashboard I'd designed, he was explaining his new streamlined workflow, his hands moving like a conductor's. The directors nodded, eager to worship the new sun. They saw green lights. They saw stability. I saw a delicate ecosystem of timed authorizations and recalibrated thresholds. Julian thought he'd stolen a masterpiece. In reality, he'd hijacked a high-speed train and fired the engineer while the tracks were still being laid. My phone buzzed. A private message from a ghost in compliance. "They've flagged your credentials as restricted, not terminated. They're scared. Calla." I didn't reply. I just watched the dashboard. A single pixel flickered a micro-stutter in the data flow that only its creator would recognize. The first tremor of a coming earthquake. "We've removed the unnecessary friction." Julian's voice boomed, referring to the safety checks I'd spent a decade perfecting. I lifted my box. It was surprisingly light. As I walked toward the elevator, the green lights reflected in the glass seemed paler, flickering against a darkness they weren't prepared to handle. The announcement hit my phone before my coffee could even cool. Julian's face dominated the live stream, his jaw set in that specific brand of unearned confidence. The headline scrolled beneath him in aggressive gold. "A new era Whitmore Corp announces historic merger." I sat in the corner of a dimly lit bistro across from the tower, watching the reflected sunlight hit the boardroom windows. Inside, I knew they were sipping vintage champagne. Julian was at the podium, his voice booming through the feed about synergy and unprecedented velocity. He was talking about the Vane Group. I didn't need to download the prospectus. I knew Vane better than Julian knew his own reflection. 2 years ago, as a corporate cleaner for a silent private equity firm, I had been the one to sign the seizure orders that froze Vane's offshore accounts. I had personally locked their metaphorical doors because they were a hollow shell built on predatory debt and falsified invoices. Julian hadn't just bypassed my review. He had sprinted away from it. He'd traded the company's stability for a partner that was effectively a financial corpse, hoping the smell wouldn't reach the shareholders until his bonus cleared. I scrolled through the leaked term sheets on my tablet. It was a disaster. No audits. No force majeure protections. Julian had stripped away every safeguard I'd spent a decade installing. Viewing my caution as friction, he'd tied his family's legacy to a sinking anchor and was currently throwing a party on the deck. Suddenly, my phone vibrated, not a notification, but a call from an encrypted number. The liquidity trigger is active. A distorted voice said without a greeting, "He signed the master agreement 10 minutes ago. He just gave us the keys to the house." Kala. I looked back at the tower. The applause from the live stream was deafening, but all I could hear was the sound of a trap snapping shut. "Good," I said, standing up and leaving my untouched coffee behind. Let's see how long he can tread water. The conference call didn't come from a desk phone. It came from an unlisted server. That was the first red flag. The second was the silence that lingered before anyone dared to breathe. "Kala," the HR director began, her voice a forced silk. "We're looking at a procedural hiccup, a $50 million discrepancy in the Vane merger. It seems your final sign-off was never logged." Julian didn't wait for her to finish. His voice cut in, sharp and frantic, vibrating with a kind of ego that was starting to crack. "It's a paperwork error. Kala, we need you to log into the portal and backdate the compliance memo. 10 minutes of your time, and we can discuss a very generous severance. Or we can discuss why the SEC is looking for a fall guy." I leaned back in my chair, the dim light of my apartment reflecting off my laptop screen. I wasn't just listening. I was watching the metadata. They were calling from a burner line. "You don't need a signature, Julian," I said, my voice dropping into a register of icy calm. "You need a sacrificial lamb. You realized 40 minutes too late that Vane's debt is tied to a predatory lending loop, a loop I put in place years ago." The silence on the other end was absolute. I could almost hear Julian's heart hammering against his ribs. "Listen to me, you arrogant bitch," Julian hissed, dropping the facade. "I am a Whitmore. My name is on the building. Yours is on a cardboard box in a dumpster. Sign the memo, or I'll make sure you never handle a penny of private equity again. I'll bury you in litigation until you're 90. I didn't flinch. I just pressed save on the recording. "Threats are the last refuge of a man who has already lost," I told him. "I'll see you at the emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. I'll even bring my own pen." I hung up before he could scream. My phone buzzed immediately with a mandatory summons. I didn't need to read it. The trap was set, but Julian was the one walking into it. The boardroom was a vacuum. Phones were stacked like dead weights. Laptops were shuttered. It was the kind of silence that didn't signify peace, but a collective agreement to look the other way. I took the seat at the foot of the table, the exile's chair. Julian was absent, likely hiding in a glass office, but his father, Arthur Whitmore, sat at the head. He didn't look like a man facing a crisis. He looked like a man who owned the concept of truth. "The minority shareholders requested your testimony," Arthur said, the word testimony tasting like ash in his mouth. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I slid my tablet into the center of the mahogany table. On the screen, a forensic map bloomed, a digital web of wire transfers routed through Vane's shell companies and looping back into Julian's private equity accounts. It wasn't just a procedural hiccup. It was a $50 million heist. "This is interpretation," a director snapped, his face flushing. "In a merger of this scale, integration costs are fluid. It's not fluid when the destination is a Cayman Island account registered to your CEO's son, I countered. I looked at each of them. Their eyes didn't show shock. They showed calculation. They weren't afraid of the crime. They were afraid of the sunlight. Arthur finally looked at me. His gaze was ancient and cold. We will handle this internally. Calla, your services are no longer required. For the sake of your career, I suggest you forget the geography of these accounts. It was a dismissal and a threat wrapped in a father's protection. As security stepped forward, the same two men from Chapter 1, I stood up slowly. I didn't fight. I didn't plead. I leaned over the table, my voice a low, lethal hum. Check the lease for this building. Arthur, specifically. Clause 14.4. You'll find that when the tenant is under federal investigation for fraud, the ownership reverts to the primary creditor. I felt the air leave the room. I'm not the help anymore, I whispered. I'm the landlord. I walked out before the first protest could form. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Clause 14.4 triggered. The locks change at midnight. The silence in the hallway was thick. The kind that follows a grenade blast before the ears start to ring. Behind me, the boardroom doors remained sealed, but I could feel the frantic energy through the wood. Julian's father would be reaching for a phone. The lawyers would be scrambling for a binder that hadn't been opened in a decade. I didn't wait for the elevator. I walked toward the emergency stairs, my heels clicking a steady, rhythmic countdown on the marble. My phone vibrated. No caller ID. Calla, Arthur Whitmore's voice was a low growl, stripped of its previous boardroom polish. What did you do to the lease? I didn't do anything to it. Arthur, I said, pushing open the heavy stairwell door. I simply bought the debt that holds it. You spent so much time looking at the horizon of the Vane merger that you forgot to look at the ground beneath your feet. This is a headquarters, not a pawn shop. You can't just buy a skyscraper, he hissed. In Pittsburgh, you can. If the holding company is delinquent on its tax credits and the primary creditor is a trust I've managed for years. Clause 14.4. In the event of a material misrepresentation of assets by the tenant, the lease is voidable at the discretion of the owner. I paused on the landing. I'm exercising that discretion. As of 9:00 a.m., Whitmore Corp is trespassing. The silence on the other end was absolute. He wasn't just losing money now, he was losing the very walls that defined his name. What do you want? He finally asked, his voice sounding old frail. I want the truth about the 50 million, Arthur, and I want Julian to be the one to hand me the keys. I hung up. Outside, the Pittsburgh fog was lifting, revealing the steel skeleton of the city. For the first time in years, the view didn't look like a challenge. It looked like a map. The call came while I was sitting in my car, the engine idling in a dark corner of the parking structure. I wasn't just Calla Whitmore, the fired analyst. I was Calla Whitmore, the managing director of Aegis Capital. Aegis, Arthur's voice cracked over the speaker. You're telling me my primary creditor has been sitting in my cubicles for 5 years? That's corporate espionage. It's called distressed asset monitoring. Arthur, I replied, watching the security guards through my rearview mirror. Aegis doesn't just lend money to legacies. We ensure those legacies don't burn our capital. I wasn't an employee. I was a structural integrity test. And your son just failed it. I opened a file on my dashboard. It was a map of Whitmore Corp's debt, a tangled web of rolling notes and waived covenants that I had personally managed from the shadows. You waived the ethical indemnity clause when you pushed the Vane merger, I continued, my voice clinical. The moment Julian asked me to backdate that memo, he triggered a bad actor provision under the swap agreement. Aegis now has the right to convert all outstanding debt into voting equity, effectively immediately. You can't do this. Julian's voice suddenly screamed into the line. He sounded small, like a child realized the floor was actually lava. I'll sue you into the dirt. With what money? Julian, the 50 million you moved to the Caymans that's been frozen by a Mariva injunction as of 3 minutes ago. The silence that followed was the heaviest yet. It was the sound of an empire realizing it was actually a house of cards, and the wind had just started to blow. I'm not coming back to save you, I said, like putting the car in gear. I'm coming back to foreclose. I drove toward the exit, for the first time. The gate didn't just open, it felt like a salute. The board meeting stalled on a frozen slide. Julian was mid-sentence, his hands spread wide as if he were blessing the room with his presence. When his tablet went black, he tapped the glass once, then harder, on the wall behind him. The high-definition projector flickered, his growth projections vanishing in their place. A single line of red text burned into the screen, credentials revoked, access suspended. Someone let out a nervous laugh that died instantly. A phone buzzed at the far end of the table. Then another. It was a digital wave. A chorus of haptic vibrations signaling the arrival of the ethics violation notice I had triggered from the lobby. I walked in just as the general counsel stood up, her face draining of color as she read the legal headers from Aegis Capital. Julian spun toward the head of the table. Dad! What is this tell it to fix the server? Arthur Whitmore didn't look at his son. He was staring at his own screen, his lips moving silently as he calculated the math of his own destruction. I didn't rush to my seat. I stood at the threshold, watching the chaos. The microphones on the table cut out with a sharp pop. The smart glass windows of the boardroom tinted to opaque black, sealing the room. I stepped forward and placed a matte black Aegis access card on the mahogany surface. It didn't slide. It landed with a heavy, final thud. The server isn't broken. Julian, I said, my voice cutting through the panic like a scalpel. It's performing exactly as I programmed it to, under the bad actor provision of your debt covenant. Your voting rights were transferred to me 60 seconds ago. Julian pushed back his chair, the screech of metal on marble loud enough to make the directors flinch. You can't do this. This is my name. This is my building. It was your building, I corrected him, checking my watch. As of now, you're just a guest who has overstayed his welcome. And the locks have already changed. Julian broke first. He lunged to his feet so violently his chair clattered against the marble floor. His palms slammed the mahogany table, rattling the crystal water glasses. His voice was raw, a jagged edge of family legacy and unearned ego. He screamed about his father's bloodline, about the help for getting their place, about the decades his name had been etched in Pittsburgh steel. The words were a frantic attempt to scream reality back into the shape he wanted. No one moved to defend him. The directors sat like statues, their eyes fixed on anything but him. Arthur tried to intervene, his voice a low, desperate vibration. Calla, think of the market. Think of the optics. We can settle this in a private room. He was still bargaining. He still thought this was a negotiation. There is no private room. Arthur, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The silence in the room was mine now. You're not the owners anymore. You're just caretakers who forgot to pay the rent and stole from the till. I looked directly at Julian. His face was a mask of pale, sweating fury. You called me the help on Monday, I said, my voice echoing in the opaque glass chamber. Today, I'm the one letting you go. Termination for cause, embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. I tapped the confirm icon on my tablet. A dual notification chimed on every screen in the room. The official SEC filing was live. Julian's digital identity was scrubbed from the building's infrastructure in real time. Security, I called out. The side doors opened, not the main entrance where the cameras waited, but the service exit, the one used for trash and deliveries. 2 guards stepped in. They didn't look at Julian with the fear they had yesterday. They looked at him like an obstacle. Julian looked around for an ally, a friend, a legacy. He found only the service door. It's over, Julian, I said as the guards took his arms. Don't forget your box on the way out. The door clicked shut behind them. A soft, muffled sound. The sound of a name becoming a footnote. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum where the Whitmore ego used to be. No one moved. A director reached for a glass of water, his hand trembling, then pulled back as if the act of drinking required a vote. I didn't sit in the head chair. I stood at the window, watching the Pittsburgh fog finally burn off the river. The general counsel slid a thick binder toward me. The title was embossed in gold interim chief executive. I didn't even open it. I'm not taking the seat, I said. My voice was a calm vibration in the still air. Kala, the markets need a face. The board is willing to offer. The markets need a foundation, not a face. I interrupted. I pulled a pre-drafted document from my folder, a term sheet for a structured sale to a legacy-focused private equity firm. Here are the terms of the acquisition. It includes a 5-year employment guarantee for all staff below the executive level. The Whitmore name is removed. The debt is settled. The poison is out. I initialed the final page. I took what was owed to Aegis Capital to the penny. Not a cent more for vengeance, not a cent less for mercy. As I walked toward the door, a junior analyst, the same one who had watched me being escorted out a week ago, stood by the elevators. He didn't clap. He simply nodded, his back a little straighter than it had been before. He was the one who would build what came next. Outside, the air didn't feel lighter. It felt sharper. I walked away from the tower without looking back. I didn't destroy them. I just stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. True power isn't about owning the room. It's about knowing you're the only one who has the key to the exit. 8% sat on the table between us like a deadline pretending to be a reward. The ceramic mug was still warm in my hands when I stepped into conference room 4B. The words, "World's Best Architect," stared back at me in chipped blue letters, a relic from a decade ago, back when this company still had a soul. Today, there was no cake. There was only Julian, our CEO. His sleeves rolled up like a man prepared for a dirty job, and Marcus from legal, whose pen was already uncapped. The paper slid across the mahogany surface. I didn't touch it. I watched Julian's eyes. They weren't on me, they were on my hands, waiting for the tremor that wouldn't come. "It's a generous adjustment, Marin," Julian said. His voice was smooth, the kind of professional kindness that felt like a plastic shroud. I finally looked down. 8%? That was the bait. But as my eyes scanned the fine print, the hook revealed itself a 3-year non-compete clause, so restrictive it would effectively bury my career in Seattle. They weren't rewarding my past. They were purchasing my silence. "If you don't sign," Marcus added, his voice devoid of inflection, "we'll consider that your decision to transition toward voluntary retirement." Today, the room felt suddenly pressurized. At 48, I knew how to read a system failure before the alarms even triggered. I looked at the wall-mounted camera. The red tally light was dark. No recording, no witnesses. This wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush in a dead zone. I thought of the mug, the weight of 10 years of loyalty, and the thousands of lines of code I'd written to keep this ship afloat. My fingers tightened around the handle until the ceramic bit into my palm. They hadn't just decided I was expensive, they had decided I was a threat that needed to be neutralized. "You've been with us a long time," Julian said, his tone shifting to a practiced softness. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I set the mug down. The clink echoed in the hollow silence of the room. I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I stood up, feeling a cold, crystalline clarity settle over me. If they wanted me gone, they had already cut the wires. But they forgot one thing. I was the one who designed the grid. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice steady. Julian's face hardened. "The offer expires when you walk out that door." "Marin." I didn't answer. I walked out, leaving the paper and the 8% behind. My system access would be gone in minutes, but as I stepped into the hallway, I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't just an architect. I was a ghost in the machine. My badge still opened the glass doors, but the building had already begun to exhale me. I sat at my desk and opened the terminal. The dashboard stalled, refreshing with a sea of grayed-out tiles. Access denied. Read only where I used to build empires. It was a digital straitjacket. I could see the pulse of the company, but I could no longer touch it. Then, the Slack notifications began to chirp. I watched, paralyzed, as my own avatar lit up in the hashtag engineering-global channel. Marin Caldwell is typing. A message appeared. "Proceed with the V2.0 bypass. Skip the staging validation. We need the speed." My stomach dropped. I hadn't touched the keyboard. It was a deep fake of my professional identity. A trail of breadcrumbs being laid by someone else to ensure that when the system eventually shattered, my name would be on the wreckage. I watched the thumbs up emojis stack up. My colleagues weren't questioning the orders, they were just relieved the risk belonged to me. I slammed the laptop shut. I wouldn't fight them in a space they now controlled. I pulled out a physical notebook. Ink on paper, the only medium they couldn't hack. I began to map the architecture from memory, tracing the data flows I'd designed 5 years ago. My pen hovered over the vertex module. During the 19 refactor, under impossible deadlines, I'd left a seam, an undocumented logic gate. It wasn't a bug, but a blind spot. If the v2.0 push bypassed validation, it would hit that gate like a freight train. The system wouldn't just crash, it would loop indefinitely. Searching for a ghost. Marin, we're going to need your sign-off on the transition logs. A voice called out. It was Sarah, my protege. She stood in my doorway, her eyes darting to my hands, then to the closed laptop. She looked guilty, but she didn't look away. She was already wearing the promotion I hadn't even vacated yet. I folded the page from my notebook and slipped it into my pocket. The logs are already written. Sarah, I said, my voice eerily calm. Apparently, I've been very busy today. As she walked away, I realized they weren't just erasing my future. They were weaponizing my past. They wanted a villain, I would give them a masterclass in architecture instead. The livestream filled my screen a sea of tailored suits and champagne flutes. On the NASDAQ floor, Julian stood beneath a banner that read, V2.0, the future of data. The bell rang, a sharp, metallic sound that felt like a nail being driven into the coffin of my career. My name was never mentioned. My decade of sweat was distilled into a single, sleek marketing slide. But as the technical diagrams flashed behind him, my blood turned to ice. I didn't see innovation, I saw a ghost. They hadn't built a new system. They had resurrected Project Icarus, the volatile prototype I had personally mothballed 3 years ago because the security architecture was porous. Julian was selling a house with no foundation and calling it Agile. A system alert pinged on my personal tablet, a residual link I'd forgotten to sever. It was a compliance diff. I watched in real time as my name was programmatically stripped from the lead architect field and replaced with system_generated. I wasn't just being erased, I was being replaced by an algorithm. Julian leaned into the microphone, his smile tight and predatory. We removed the friction. He told the investors, we cut the bloat. V2.0 is built for pure, unadulterated speed. Friction. That was his word for the safeguards I'd spent years perfecting. He hadn't cut bloat. He'd cut the brakes on a downhill slope. I opened my private archives, comparing his new code to my old warnings. The timestamps were a death warrant. In my version, the system would stall to protect user data. In his, it would overwrite everything just to keep the dashboard green. The live stream ended, leaving me in the silence of my home office. I picked up my pen and started a new list, not of what I had lost, but of what they had ignored. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a witness to a crime that hadn't happened yet. Julian thought he was ringing a victory bell, but all I heard was the first chime of a countdown. Sarah didn't knock. She used her foot to hook the door shut and leaned against it. Her arms crossed in a defensive posture she hadn't yet mastered. She didn't ask how I was. Her eyes went straight to the notebook on my desk. You should stop writing things down. Marin, she said. It wasn't advice. It was a threat disguised as a tip. I slid my hand over the page, covering the logic gate I'd sketched. Is that what Julian told you to say? Her jaw tightened. I came to make sure you understood the math. This isn't about code anymore. It's about the IPO. She stepped into the light, and I saw the exhaustion behind her ambition. The board wanted a yes man. You kept giving them wait and no. I gave them safety. Sarah, safety is expensive. She snapped. And you were the one who made me the lead on the Icarus transition. You gave me the keys. I felt the air leave my lungs. I hadn't just mentored her. I had unknowingly trained my own executioner. You were in the room when we mothballed that project. You saw the data corruption logs. I saw a way to hit the Q4 targets, she countered, her voice dropping to a jagged whisper. I'm the one who suggested the voluntary transition for you. I told Julian you were burnt out, inflexible. The betrayal didn't feel like a stab. It felt like a slow freezing of the blood. It wasn't personal to her. It was just an optimization. A line of code she had refactored to make the system run faster. You can still walk away with the 8%, she said, reaching out as if to touch my arm, then thinking better of it. Just give me the master override keys for the legacy encryption. Make it clean. I stood up, the chair legs screaming against the linoleum. I didn't look at her. I looked through her. You want the keys to a house that's already on fire. Sarah, go ahead, but don't ask me to hold the match. I grabbed my bag and walked past her. As the door swung open to the frantic buzz of the office, I realized my loyalty hadn't been an investment. It had been a debt, and today, I was done paying it. The phone vibrated against the mahogany desk, a blocked number pulsing like a heartbeat. I let it ring until the final second. We aren't looking to hire you, Marin. The voice was filtered, low, and terrifyingly calm. We're looking for a witness. I didn't ask who they were. In Seattle, the walls have ears, and the competitors have spies. A witness to what the ghost drop. The voice replied. My breath hitched. That was my internal code name for the Icarus vulnerability, a term I'd never put in an email. We know Julian stripped the encryption layers to shave 4 milliseconds off the latency. We know you refused to sign the safety audit. I walked to the window, watching the rain blur the city lights. You've been digging in my trash. We've been reading your trajectory. Julian is rushing the IPO because the system is a ticking clock. We're filing an injunction to freeze their assets before the first bell rings. You want to tank the stock so you can buy the patents for pennies, I countered. You don't care about the data. You want the carcass. Leverage is a neutral tool. Marin, you can be the hero who exposed a fraud, or the architect who went down with the ship. Truth is only valuable if it's told before the explosion. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of my own choices. If I talked, I destroyed the work of my life. If I stayed silent, I let Julian sell a lie to millions. I don't take sides. I said, my voice cracking just enough to show the strain. In a collision, Marin, there are no bystanders, only victims and survivors. The line went dead with a soft, final click. I stared at the black screen of my phone. I was being squeezed between two monsters, the one who stole my work and the one who wanted to use it as a weapon. I opened my notebook to a fresh page. I didn't write a name. I wrote a coordinate. The blind spot in the code wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was my only exit strategy. The badge reader pulsed a steady, judgmental red before finally flickering to green. Click. The sound was a gunshot in the midnight silence of the floor. I stepped into the shadows of the bullpen, the air smelling of stale coffee and ozone. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was a trespasser in my own cathedral. You're late, Marin. I froze. Evan was standing by the server racks, the blue light of the status LEDs carving deep lines into his face. He was my best engineer, the only one who still looked me in the eye. He didn't ask why I was there. He just checked the security monitor. You have 4 minutes before the automated sweep resyncs, he whispered. After that, your credentials trigger a silent alarm. I didn't waste time. I sat at my old terminal, my fingers moving by muscle memory. I bypassed the UI and went straight into the kernel-level audit logs. I wasn't looking for code, I was looking for the intent. There it was. File 09-alpha. It was a direct directive from Julian's private server. It didn't say optimize. It said disable redundant security handshakes, prioritize throughput over parity. Underneath it, in a margin note that should have been scrubbed, were 3 words that changed everything. Ignore Caldwell's veto. It wasn't a mistake. It was a premeditated execution of the system's integrity. He signed off on it. Evan breathed, looking over my shoulder. He knew the data would corrupt under a 10% load. He didn't care, I said, my voice like flint. He just needed the dashboard to look fast for the IPO roadshow. My phone buzzed. A message from Julian Marin. Let's not make tomorrow morning ugly. Sign the papers. And we all win. The irony tasted like copper. I copied the raw, unencrypted logs onto a physical drive, the black box of the company's soul. Marin, move, Evan hissed. The sweep is starting. I pulled the drive and stood. I looked at Evan, the man I'd mentored, the one I was about to leave in the blast zone. Delete my login trace. Evan, protect yourself. He didn't nod. He just turned to the keyboard. As I slipped into the stairwell, the drive felt heavy in my pocket. Julian thought he was buying my silence with 8%. He didn't realize that I'd just found the price of his empire, and it was a lot more than he could afford to pay. The call didn't just vibrate, it felt like a seismic event. I was standing in a quiet cafe. The smell of roasted beans, a sharp contrast to the digital rot I knew was spreading through the city. Marin. Julian's voice was stripped of its usual silk. It was jagged, frantic. The V2.0 deployment just hit a hard stop. The East Pipeline is hemorrhaging packets. We're locked out. I leaned against the brick wall, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. My blind spot, the undocumented seam, had finally been triggered by the sheer volume of the IPO traffic. The system wasn't crashing. It was protecting itself from his incompetence. The board is in the room. Marin, he hissed. The lead investor is threatening to pull the funding. We need the master override. Now, you don't need an architect. Julian, you need a miracle. Name your price, he snapped. The 8%. Forget it. You want 20 CTO public credit for the build? It's yours. Just get us back online before the market opens. I watched a raindrop trail down the window. I don't want a promotion. Julian, I want an admission. What a signed digital confession. I said, my voice as cold as a logic gate. Send an email to the board and the compliance lead. State clearly that you personally ordered the removal of the security layers to inflate the speed metrics. Admit you bypassed my veto. That's career suicide. Then watch the screen turn red. I replied, the system is currently overwriting the core logs to protect the data. In 10 minutes, there won't be a company left to IPO. You've already priced the alternative. Is the truth more expensive than the bankruptcy silence stretched? Filled only by the muffled shouting of panicked directors in his background? Ping! The notification hit my screen. A blind copied email to the board? It was all there, the fraud. The greed, the reckless shortcuts. He had traded his reputation for 5 minutes of my time. I opened my laptop. I didn't give him a permanent fix. I just eased the pressure on the seam, turning the light from amber to a fragile, temporary green. It's breathing again. I said, we'll finalize the contract this afternoon. Julian said, his voice hollow. Don't bother, I replied, closing the lid. I've already seen enough of this system to know I don't want to own it. The dashboard stayed green, but the atmosphere in the office had turned funereal. By 2:00 p.m., Julian was a ghost. His Slack account was deactivated, and a security detail stood outside his corner office like gargoyles. An internal memo flickered onto every screen IPO delayed. Bonuses suspended. Immediate budget freeze. The forthcoming updates were a euphemism for a sinking ship. I walked toward the exit, my box of personal belongings feeling heavier with every step. I had won. The truth was out. But as I reached the lobby, a figure blocked my path. It was Leo, a junior dev from the data team. He was 24, brilliant, and currently vibrating with a suppressed, jagged rage. I hope the high ground has a nice view. Marin, he said. His voice was low, trembling. I stopped. The system was a fraud. Leo, it would have collapsed and taken everyone's data with it. And instead, you took my mother's health care, he snapped, stepping into my space. The IPO was my only way to pay for her oncology copays. The board just froze all vested options. My team, We're being outsourced by Friday to offset the litigation costs of your little truth bomb. The silence in the lobby was deafening. Colleagues who had once looked at me with awe now averted their eyes. I had decapitated the monster, but the monster's body was falling on the people I'd spent a decade trying to protect. I didn't choose the fraud. Julian did. But you chose the explosion, he whispered. You could have fixed the blind spot quietly. You could have negotiated behind the scenes, but you wanted him to bleed. He looked at my world's best architect mug peeking out of my box. You're not a hero. Marin, you're just the only one who can afford to have a conscience. He walked away, leaving me standing in the center of the room I helped build. The elevator chimed a hollow, mocking sound. I realized then that justice isn't a clean line of code. It's a messy, destructive force that doesn't distinguish between the guilty and the hungry. I stepped into the rain, the world's best title feeling like a lead weight in my arms. I was right. I was vindicated, and I was utterly alone. The competitor's offer arrived in an encrypted file that smelled of vultures and opportunism. Testify in the injunction, the email read. We'll grant you a sign-on bonus that triples your 8%. Help us bury Julian, and we'll give you a corner office in the aftermath. I didn't reply. I deleted the file. I was done being a weapon in other men's wars. 48 hours later, a different invitation arrived. It wasn't from a rival company, but from a group of institutional investors, the ones who had lost the most in the IPO delay. They didn't meet me in a boardroom. They met me in a quiet, sterile library. We don't want your code, Myron, the lead trustee said, his voice weary. We realized that while we were looking for the fastest engine, we fired the only person who knew how to use the brakes. I leaned back, my hand steady. You want me to fix Julian's mess? No. We want you to audit the entire portfolio. We want someone whose no is final. We want a reputation we can't buy, but can finally trust. It was the realization I'd been running from. My value was never the thousands of lines of code I'd written. It was my refusal to lie about them. At 48, I wasn't an outdated architect. I was an insurance policy against corporate greed. I won't take a salary. I said, I'll take a retainer that allows me to walk the moment I'm ignored. I don't report to the CEO, I report to the audit committee. And if I find a blind spot, the project stops. No exceptions. They looked at each other. The air in the room grew heavy with the cost of that transparency. To them, I was a massive, expensive bottleneck. That will slow down our market entry by months. A woman in a gray suit noted. Exactly, I replied. Speed is what got you, Julian. Integrity is what gets you a company that's still standing in 10 years. One by one. They nodded. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being asked to fit into a system. I was being asked to define it. I wasn't just Marin Caldwell, the architect. I was the one who held the scale. The new office didn't have a view of the NASDAQ ticker or the harbor. It was a simple brick and beam space in Pioneer Square. Quiet enough to hear the rain tapping against the glass. It didn't feel like a downgrade. It felt like a sanctuary. My laptop chimed. An email from an unverified sender sat at the top of my inbox. I opened it. You won the moment you refused to sign. Didn't you? It was from Sarah. No apologies for the betrayal. No excuses for the IPO math. Just the haunted realization of someone still trapped in the machine I had escaped. She was likely still there, tethered to a failing system, waiting for the next Julian to tell her what she was worth. I didn't reply. I didn't need the last word. I had the last move. I hit delete and watched the message vanish. A notification from the audit committee popped up. A new project. A new set of unbreakable rules. They had sent over their architecture for review, and for the first time in 20 years, my stomach didn't knot with anxiety. I wasn't looking for ways to hide flaws. I was looking for ways to build truth. I picked up my old world's best architect mug. The handle was still chipped, but the weight felt different now. In this industry, they tell you that loyalty is a currency. They lie. Loyalty is a loan, and the interest rate eventually bankrupts you. The only thing you truly own is your no. I looked out the window at the gray Seattle sky. I had lost a title, a bonus, and a decade of comfort. But as I turned back to my desk, I realized I'd gained the one thing Julian and Sarah would never have the ability to walk away without losing myself. The door behind me wasn't locked. It didn't need to be. I wasn't afraid of who might walk in, because I finally knew exactly who was sitting in the chair. The parking garage at B4 always smelled like oil, cold concrete, and impatience. I knew that because I had helped approve its layout years ago, back when the company was still small enough that decisions were made in rooms instead of email chains. That morning, I eased my old sedan into a space marked Reserved Executive. The paint was fading. The sign was crooked. Nothing about it felt important anymore. That's when a sleek sports car cut across my hood and slammed to a stop. A young woman jumped out. Phone already raised. Camera pointed straight at me. "Guys, look at this," she said loudly, grinning into her live stream. Some old woman who doesn't know her place just took the CEO's parking spot. Her name tag read Lily Intern. I stayed in my seat, hands still on the wheel. She strutted closer, angling the camera. "This is reserved for my husband, the future CEO, Daniel Price." She paused, then quickly corrected herself. "I mean, Arthur Miller, same difference." That was the moment my stomach tightened. Not with fear, with recognition. I stepped out of the car slowly. People had begun to gather drivers, warehouse supervisors, a few early shift managers pretending not to stare. "I'm sorry," I said calmly, loud enough for her audience to hear. "You're right. Congratulations." Her smile widened, triumphant and sharp. I backed out of the spot, letting her take it as if she'd won something real. As I walked away toward the stairwell, my phone vibrated in my hand. Why did I apologize instead of reacting the way everyone expected? And as usual, this story is a work of fiction, created by our editorial team for storytelling purposes. All characters, events, and organizations are fictional. Any resemblance is purely coincidental. Thank you, and let's continue. The stairwell smelled worse than the garage. Diesel, old paint. Time? I took each step slowly, listening to the echo of my shoes, replaying the name she had said wrong before correcting herself. Daniel Price, not the CEO, not even close. At the top landing, I stopped and looked back down through the concrete opening. Lily was still live streaming, laughing, basking in attention. She thought she'd won a parking spot. She had no idea what she just parked herself on. Lily took the spot like a trophy. She angled her car perfectly between the lines, stepped back, and gave her live stream a slow, deliberate pan as if the concrete itself were proof of her status. The comments were flying. Hearts. Laughing emojis. Someone shouted encouragement from behind a phone screen she couldn't see. I didn't look back. The stairwell door closed behind me with a dull, metallic thud, sealing off the noise. Inside, the air was thick with diesel fumes and something older oil baked into concrete over decades of trucks coming and going. This building had never been meant to impress. It was meant to move things, quietly, efficiently, without spectacle. I took the stairs up instead of the elevator. Habit, also avoidance. By the second landing, footsteps echoed behind me. Miss U. Sloan. I turned. The security guard was old enough that his uniform hung on him like a memory. His name patch said, Frank. I remembered approving overtime for his team during a winter storm years ago. He remembered me clearly, but couldn't place why. Don't get involved, he said quietly. Not a warning. Advice. Daniel's running hiring now. He's got influence. Real influence. He'll fire anyone who gets in that girl's way. That girl, I repeated, gently. Frank nodded toward the garage below. She's been here 3 weeks, already acting like she owns the place. I thanked him and kept walking. Each step felt heavier than it should have. Not because of Lily, because of what Frank had said so easily. As if it were a known fact. As if fear had become part of the building's ventilation system. By the time I reached the main floor, my reflection in the glass doors startled me. I looked like a visitor. Plain coat, sensible shoes, no badge swinging from my neck, a company I helped build. and I felt like a guest passing through. My phone buzzed. A missed call? Daniel Price? No voicemail. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without checking the time. Let him wonder. Outside, somewhere beneath my feet, Lily was still celebrating her win, still laughing, still certain she'd proven something important. I didn't interrupt her. Some victories only feel sweet because you don't yet understand the cost. What kind of person walks away when they clearly have something to say? Daniel Price finally called me back just as I reached my office. Not his office. Mine. Or what used to be mine. Back when doors still carried names instead of departments, I let the phone ring twice before answering. Meredith, he said, his voice smooth in the way men learn when they think they're in control. If you're retired, you should be at home, not causing scenes in my parking garage. My parking garage? I didn't cause a scene. I said, I moved my car. A pause, then a small, humorless laugh. You embarrassed someone who matters. An intern? I said, she's connected. Daniel replied, careful now. You should be careful too. This company isn't what it was when you were signing papers. The words landed exactly where he meant them to. Old, irrelevant, outdated. I was never signing papers for attention. I said, I signed them so people like you wouldn't forget who they worked for. Silence stretched between us. Then he said, stay out of it. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long moment before setting it face down on my desk. The office felt smaller than it had an hour ago, as if the walls had shifted inward while I was gone. That was when the message came through. Unknown number, stop now. Or your tax records from 10 years ago go public. No greeting, no signature. Just certainty. My chest tightened. Not panic, something colder. Calculated. Whoever sent it didn't want me scared. They wanted me quiet. I didn't delete the message. Instead, I forwarded it to a contact I hadn't used in years. A name saved without a last initial. Someone I'd helped once. When the company was young and the rules were still being written. The reply came back almost immediately. Don't respond. Keep everything. We'll look at it. That was all. I set the phone down and pressed my palms flat against the desk until the shaking stopped. For the first time since the garage, I felt the edge of fear catch up to me. This was no longer about a parking spot. Somewhere below, engines roared and tires squealed against concrete. The company kept moving. Always did. I exhaled slowly and stood. If I was going to lose something, I needed to know what it was. Lose what exactly? The report reached me before Daniel resurfaced. Not formally. Not through any channel that still had my name attached to it. It came as a quiet ping from IT, an automated flag that hadn't been meant for me at all. Someone had routed it wrong. Or maybe right. Depending on how you looked at it. Unauthorized access detected. Executive-level credentials. Zone C. Zone C wasn't a mistake zone. It wasn't a place you wandered into. It housed international shipping manifests, live routing data, client volumes that shifted markets if they leaked at the wrong time. The access log listed the cardholder, Lily Carter, intern. I read the line twice. An intern didn't get executive clearance by accident. Not in logistics. Not in a company that had been audited into paranoia after its second expansion. Minutes later, another alert followed this one human. Not automated. She's posting again. Someone from IT messaged. Photos, screenshots. She doesn't know what she's holding. I didn't open the links. I didn't need to. If Lily was flashing international manifests online, she wasn't just showing off. She was being used, either as a distraction or as a courier too inexperienced to understand the weight of what she was carrying. I checked Daniel's access history. Empty. Too empty. No logins. No badge swipes. No activity since that morning. He had wiped himself clean. That was when it became obvious Daniel hadn't just lied about his title. He had borrowed authority the way some men borrowed suits long enough to look convincing. Never long enough to be held accountable. Lily was his proof of power. His shield. His excuse. The intern did it. She didn't understand. She acted alone. I closed the logs and leaned back, staring at the ceiling tiles above my desk. I had signed off on this system. I knew its weaknesses, and I knew exactly how much damage could be done before anyone outside this building noticed. Down in the garage, Lily had blocked a car and declared herself untouchable. Up here, someone had handed her keys she should never have held, and Daniel Price had disappeared the moment those keys started leaving fingerprints. If he was only the HR director, where had the power really come from? I found Lily in the lobby near the security desk. Sitting on the edge of a low concrete bench with her phone dark in her hands, she looked smaller without the live stream, younger. The confidence she'd worn in the garage had collapsed into something brittle and exposed. Her knee bounced uncontrollably as she stared at the floor. She didn't see me at first. "You promised," she hissed into her phone. "You said after the IPO, you said I wouldn't have to worry about any of this." Silence on the other end. Then her face tightened. "I did exactly what you told me to do." She said, "I used the card. I took the photos. Don't act like this is my fault." I stepped closer. She looked up sharply. Recognition flashing across her face followed immediately by defensiveness. "You," she said, "you're the woman from the garage." "Yes," I replied. "I didn't sit. I didn't crowd her either, and you shouldn't be here alone." Her laugh was thin and humorless. "Funny." That's what he said when I asked where he was. "Daniel," I asked. She hesitated. "Just long enough." "My fiancé," she corrected. "My husband." "Soon?" I let the word hang between us before answering. "The CEO is in London." "Lily." Her head snapped up. "What, Arthur Miller hasn't been in Chicago for weeks?" I said calmly, "He doesn't drive a black sedan, and he doesn't give interns executive access cards." Her mouth opened, then closed again. "You're lying," she said. But the words lacked conviction. "Daniel wouldn't risk his job." "He already has," I said. "He just planned on you taking the fall." The color drained from her face. "He said the title didn't matter," she whispered, "that people respected him. That CEO was just a label. For some people," I said gently. "Labels are camouflage." She shook her head. Panic rising fast now. "He said he'd marry me after everything's settled. After the company went public." I watched the truth settle into her posture. Shoulders folding inward, spine curving under weight she hadn't known she was carrying. "You need a lawyer," I said. "And you need to stop listening to him." Her phone buzzed again. She didn't answer. For the first time since the garage, I felt something shift inside me. If Lily was a pawn, then Daniel hadn't just moved her, he'd sacrificed her. And if that was true, then I wasn't standing across from a rival. I was standing across from evidence. If she had been lied to this thoroughly, who was really in control? Daniel arrived with security, not rushing, not shouting. Calm in the way people are when they believe authority will do the work for them. 2 guards flanked him, hands resting near their radios, eyes already measuring me like a problem that needed removing. "There she is," Daniel said lightly, as if we were old colleagues who'd bumped into each other at a conference. "Meredith, you're causing unnecessary disruption." Lily stood frozen near the desk. She looked from him to me, confusion tightening her expression. Daniel didn't look at her. "She's done nothing wrong," he continued. "But you have interfering with staff, harassing an intern. That's serious." One of the guards stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're going to have to escort you out." I didn't argue. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket. The card was old, thicker than the new ones. The edges worn smooth by years of being carried more than shown. Its color, a muted brass gold, caught the fluorescent light as I held it up between us. "I'd like to file a formal security freeze," I said evenly. "Effective immediately." Daniel laughed. "A badge," he said. "That's your move." "It's not a badge," I replied. "It's a founder identification." The laughter stopped. "This card authorizes a temporary lockdown of access systems when there is suspected internal compromise." I continued, "Including HR-issued credentials." One of the guards shifted. He glanced at the card, then at Daniel. "You don't have that authority." Daniel said, sharper now, "I don't have your authority." I agreed. "You oversee people." "I oversee systems." Silence fell across the lobby. "What are you doing?" Lily whispered. Daniel stepped closer to me, lowering his voice. "You're making this public," he said. "If this turns into a security incident, you lose your protections too. You know the clause." I did. The same clause that gave me this power could strip it away if I was found to be acting without cause. I wasn't walking in armored. I was exposed. I'm aware. I said. I slid the card back into my pocket, behind Daniel. The security team hesitated. Not because they doubted him, but because they suddenly weren't sure about me. I had protected myself. Or I had just tightened the rope around my own neck. Did I just secure my position? Or did I hand them the leverage they needed to destroy me? The lockdown alert echoed through the building 10 minutes later. Not sirens, not lights. Just a clean clinical notification sliding across internal screens. Temporary access review in progress. Please remain at your stations. Daniel didn't look at me when it appeared. He looked past me toward the mezzanine offices where people like him usually found support. It came quickly. 2 senior managers arrived together. Their expressions already decided. Both had been promoted within the last 3 years. Both owed Daniel favors he never put in writing. This is irregular, one of them said. Not to me, but to the heir. Founder access is symbolic at this point. Interfering with HR operations could be grounds for legal action. The other added, "You're destabilizing the company." I listened without interrupting. "Stand down," Daniel said finally, confidence returning as the room aligned behind him. "We'll review this internally." I felt it then, the shift. Not against me personally, but away from me. The system choosing the path of least resistance, choosing continuity over truth. Security stepped back. Not toward Daniel. Away from everyone. Lily was escorted out for her own protection. The phrasing was gentle. The effect wasn't, she didn't resist. She didn't look at me. She just kept her head down as the doors closed behind her. Someone passed close enough to murmur in my ear. "If you push now," a voice said, low and urgent, "you'll burn the whole company." The words landed heavier than any threat. I found myself alone near the elevator bank. The garage levels blinking quietly on the panel. B4, still lit, still waiting. For the first time since that morning, doubt cut through the resolve I'd been holding together with muscle memory and pride. Was I doing this because it mattered? Or because I couldn't stand being dismissed in a place that once knew my name? The building hummed around me, servers cooling, trucks routing, schedules recalculating. The machine didn't care who was right. It only cared about staying on. My phone vibrated. An internal alert, marked urgent. I didn't open it right away. Standing there, in the cold edge of the system I'd helped build, I asked myself the question I'd been avoiding all day. Were there battles you shouldn't win even when you were right? The alert wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It appeared across internal screens one by one, replacing dashboards and calendars with a single line of text: compliance review, mandatory attendance. People stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. In a company like ours, compliance didn't interrupt unless something had already crossed the point of containment. Rachel Moore stepped forward near the security desk. She hadn't changed since the last time I'd seen her years ago. Same flat shoes, same unremarkable blazer, same posture that suggested she didn't need permission to stand anywhere. Most people barely noticed her. That was the point. "I'll be brief," she said calmly. No microphone, no raised voice. "I've been holding these records for 14 months. Daniel turned toward her slowly. "This isn't the time." "It is," Rachel replied, without heat. "It's actually overdue." She tapped her tablet once. Screens around the lobby shifted. Access logs, timestamps, vehicle IDs, cleared tolls that should never have been cleared. Daniel Price used HR override privileges to erase logistics penalties for a network of independent carriers. She continued. Vehicles tied to personal associates, repeat violations, millions in waived fees. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Additionally, Rachel said, scrolling, he issued temporary master access to an intern under false pretenses. That access was used to capture and transmit sensitive international shipping data. Lily's name appeared on the screen. Daniel didn't deny it. Instead, he exhaled sharply and said, "If this goes public, you'll damage the entire company." Rachel looked at him then. Really looked. "No," she said. "You already did. I just stopped hiding it." She glanced at me, not for approval, not for gratitude, just acknowledgement. I kept these logs because someone had to, she added, and because I remembered who protected compliance when it wasn't popular. That was all. Accounts began locking in real time. Daniel's badge failed when he tried to step back. His phone buzzed. Once, then went dark. The system didn't argue. It didn't hesitate. It simply did what it had been designed to do once someone finally told it the truth. And as Daniel stood there, stripped of borrowed authority, one thought settled cold and clear in my mind. How long had this been rotting before today? The video from B4 surfaced that night. Not all of it. Just enough. A clipped version of Lily's livestream, her voice sharp, the word old echoing louder than the concrete walls. Me standing still, not reacting, not defending myself. The caption spread faster than the footage. Entitled founder humiliates intern over parking spot. By morning, my inbox was full. Some messages were furious. Some were smug. Most assumed they already knew the story. Then the second leak appeared. An audio recording. Daniel's voice, unmistakable. Calm, manipulative. Titles are flexible, he said. People respect confidence. I'll fix it after the IPO. No commentary, no explanation. Just the truth. Released in pieces. The narrative shifted slowly. Painfully, but decisively. The word intern began to disappear from headlines. Replaced by misuse of authority. Security breach. Logistics fraud. Daniel went silent. No statements. No denials. His name vanished from internal threads. Then from calendars. Meetings were reassigned without comment. I didn't speak to the press. Instead, I assembled files, screenshots, access logs, the message that had tried to scare me into silence. By evening, the package was ready. I sent it to law enforcement. Not for revenge, for record. Truth didn't need me to defend it anymore. It just needed time. Would it last long enough to matter? They arrested Daniel Price in B4. Same concrete, same lighting, same cold air that had carried Lily's laughter days earlier. He didn't resist when they cuffed him. He just looked smaller than I remembered. Not defeated, emptied. Like a man who had finally run out of borrowed space. Lily stood near the exit, holding a cardboard box with her name written in marker. No live stream, no audience. Her face looked older, sharper. I didn't know, she said quietly when I approached. I believe you, I replied. I handed her a business card. A lawyer's. Someone who specialized in protecting people who had been persuaded to break rules they didn't understand. This isn't for revenge, I said. It's for yourself. She nodded, eyes wet, and left without looking back. Weeks passed. Daniel's termination was immediate. His HR authority voided. Accounts sealed. Charges filed. No comeback. No redemption arc. His name faded from directories the way it never should have appeared in the first place. Compliance didn't celebrate. Rachel stayed in her role. No promotion, no praise, just uninterrupted sleep. One morning, I parked again in B4. The reserved executive sign had been replaced. Clean metal, no names. I shut off the engine and sat there for a moment. No cameras, no shouting, no audience, just silence. Returned to where it belonged. She thought she was blocking the car of a nobody. I didn't argue. I just let the truth block the road for all of them. If this story made you stop and think, hit like to support, subscribe for more stories like this, and leave a comment with your perspective. We read every one.